In this video, we're going to compare two of the most popular ways to heat air and water. Number one would be a traditional like Espar or Webasto air heater that runs off of your gasoline or diesel of the van, combined with an electric water heater, versus a hydronic system, which also runs off of the diesel or gasoline of the van, but will heat the air and the water. Plus, in this video, I'll explain exactly how a hydronic system works compared to a traditional air heater and water heater. So if you're looking for the best system to heat the air and the water in a van or RV or any type of camper conversion, this video is for you. At the end of the video, I'll go over a comparison of the pros and cons of both the air heater and the water heater and which system would be best for different types of users. So let's get into it. So this is the Aqua Hot 125D. So the 125 is a model of the Aqua Hot that's designed really for camper vans and smaller RVs. These have been used for decades in larger RVs. They have much bigger units that can run an entire fifth wheel or large motor coach. So the D in the 125D means diesel. So this one runs off of diesel, and the 125G runs off of gasoline. So this will work in any camper van conversion. So last summer, we went to the Overland Expo near Denver, and we met the Aqua Hot guys. Now, Aqua Hot is actually made by the same company that makes the Max Air fan. So they've been around this industry for a long time. So we got talking to our sales rep, Trenton Sweet at Aqua Hot, and he kind of explained how this thing works, and we were really impressed. I had heard a lot about hydronic systems and watched some videos and things like that, but it felt very intimidating, and I was kind of overwhelmed at the idea of trying to install one and put one together. But when I talked to Trenton, it made a lot of sense. So the entire unit is built into this one box. Now they do have a version, I believe it's called the 125M, which is modular, where all the different components are modular and you can put them wherever you want. So if you're limited on space or this box won't fit, there is a way to do it where you can install the different components in different areas. So basically what you have here is right here is a glycol tank. This is a heat exchanger right here. So what we have is down underneath the van, we have a heater. It's a hydronic heater, very similar to the Espar or Webasto air heaters that you see. They're very similar in the way they function. I'll explain that a little bit more in a few minutes. Basically, that heater is heating up glycol, and there's a pump right back here, and that pump is pulling the glycol through a heater hose up through this heat exchanger and then back out. And it's just cycling that around and around through that hydronic heater that's mounted underneath the van. And there are some other hoses, but the basic function of this is a glycol tank, a heat exchanger, a pump, and it's just cycling that glycol through the system, that high glycol, and uses that to heat both water on demand as well as glycol that then can run out to one of these heating units to heat the van. You can also run it through your floor to do in-floor heating. I'll talk about all of those in detail in a few minutes. But you can see it's all self-contained, which makes it a lot easier and less intimidating, I think, to put one of these systems in a van than if you had to do all of the individual components and place those and figure out where to put them. All you got to do is place this box and then hook everything up. So basically, we've got that glycol coming from the heater that's mounted under the van, coming up into the system. That pump is pulling it through, cycles it through that heat exchanger, and then back out this one and back to that heater. And it's just circulating around, and it heats it up pretty hot. So these two connections right here are the supply for your heat exchangers. And basically, there's just a pump that pumps that glycol through tubing that you have throughout the van, and I'll show you that to run to the different heat exchangers and also in-floor heating if you're using that. And then these two right here is just, you have your cold water coming into this. Again, it runs through that heat exchanger, heats the water, and then back out. You have hot water coming out here. And then we have a drain down below, and this one right here is for an overflow tank, which mounts on the side. It's really a pretty slick all-in-one system. So as I said, this is heating your water, but it also will heat the air in the cabin. And the way it does that is through these heat exchangers. And they call these the cozies. So what you do is you connect these to this zone supply loop. One tube comes out, goes through these, and then back in. You can put 2 or 3. What I recommend is in a 144 or shorter van, you really can get away with 2 of these. If you have a bigger van like a 170 Sprinter or one of the longer Transits or ProMasters, you might want to go with 3. You can even put them on different zones so that if you wanted to heat one portion of the van, you can, and leave the others off. So you have your glycol coming in, flows through the heat exchanger and then back out, and then to the next cozy, and then through it and back out. And you have another, if you had a third, it would go through that one. And then you also connect this up to 12 volts, and it has fans in the back, which help blow the air out. Now, these are different than a Espar or Webasto air heater because all those are doing is just blowing hot air. The hydronic system is different because what that heater is doing is heating the glycol, and then it's running through the tubing out to these and then back in. So what it's doing is it's heating this element rather than heating the air. So it's more like radiant heat. If you're old enough like me to remember back, I went to elementary school at a really old building, and they had those wall radiator heaters all along the walls. Basically, it's the same idea. Those things heat up and give off heat, and it actually heats everything in the room rather than just heating the air. So another thing that's nice about the hydronic system is that you can actually run tubing through your floor, connect that to the system, and will heat your floor. Hey, we wanted to jump in really quick and share something with you that Lisa and I are passionate about. We're both foodies and we love cooking and creating in the kitchen, whether we're at home or cooking in a tiny van kitchen. And one of our favorite hacks is using Thrive freeze-dried foods. Why freeze-dried? Because it's lightweight, requires no refrigerator, van life bonus, and lasts for up to 25 years. And because it's washed, peeled, and chopped before it's freeze-dried, all we do is scoop it out of the can and throw it into our dish. It's picked at the peak of freshness and then freeze-dried, removing the water, but leaving all the nutrients and flavor.
With fruits, veggies, meats, and dairy products, Thrive's got you covered. They even have complete meals. Just add water and your meal is ready in about 10 minutes, which is great when you want a quick one-pot meal after a long day on the road. Whether you want healthy ingredients for quick and easy meals, shelf-stable meals for when you are on the road, or you want to be more prepared in case of emergencies, Thrive could be your answer. Check out the link below for more info.
And now back to the video. Is a really efficient way to heat it. If you've been in a van in the winter, you know that the floor is always cold. No matter how much you insulate it, what type of insulation you do, you're always going to have a cold floor. And the nice thing about a hydronic system, if you do the in-floor heating, is it takes the chill off that floor. If you set it to 75 degrees, it's going to make your floor 75 degrees. And then that heat also is going to radiate up into the rest of the van and help keep it at a very constant temperature. Now, people are a lot more familiar with the Espar or Webasto type air heaters. And basically, that's just a heater that taps into your fuel tank, has a pump, pumps the fuel out of your fuel tank, through the pump, through a tube, into the heater. It fires and burns that fuel, whether it's gas or diesel, to, in the case of an air heater, heats the air and blows it out. In the case of a hydronic heater, it heats the glycol, which then is used to heat the water, the floor, the cozies, everything that you have connected to it. Really, that heater unit is very similar in both units. A couple of the big differences are that in a air heater, you mount that heater inside the vehicle. So typically most people will put it under the passenger seat because there's a nice space there. And then you drill holes in the floor, and the exhaust and the fresh air intake go through the floor. And so it's pulling the fresh air up in, it's combusting that with the fuel, and it's blowing the exhaust back out. So the unit is inside the vehicle, which sometimes can make people feel a little bit uneasy to have that. Sometimes when it first starts, you'll smell a little bit of diesel before it starts burning really efficiently. And then maybe when you shut it down, you'll smell a little bit of diesel inside the vehicle. With the hydronic system, the furnace or the heater is actually mounted underneath the vehicle. So It is not in the vehicle at all. But that combustion is happening underneath the vehicle rather than inside. And then you have tubes, basically radiator hose, coming up out of that and into the vehicle. So those tubes are what are running inside. So I like that you don't have any combustion happening inside the vehicle. So if you do go with an air heater type system, you're also going to have a way of heating your hot water if you want to have hot water. So what most people use is either a Bosch electric water heater or an isotemp electric water heater. And I've done a complete video where I compare the two, and you can check that out. I'll put a link to it in the description. Heating your water with electricity is very inefficient. I always say that it's the number one consumer of electricity in a vehicle, especially if you're taking showers and want a lot of hot water. Typically, depending on the size of your battery bank and the size of your water heater, you'll use 10 to 20, sometimes even 25% of your battery capacity just to heat the water one time. So if you're staying in one spot for several days and you don't have the ability to hook up to shore power, you may not even be able to heat your water every day because your battery is just going to get too low and you're not going to be able to recharge it just off of solar enough to handle heating that water. So one of the things I love about this system is that it's hot water on demand. As long as your diesel heater underneath the van is running, you're going to have hot water. Now let's talk about the control for these two units. If you have an Espar, you're familiar with this little guy. You probably have a love-hate relationship with this little controller. And the other types, there are different types of controllers for Webasto, and Espars has a couple of different options. But it's basically this idea where you push a button and there's a little readout and you kind of dial it around, and you got to kind of go through some steps. You press it to bring up the menu, you set the temperature, you set the time, you push the button in, it starts going. So this is the controller for the Aqua Hot. You can see that it's much larger. It's color display, very graphical, shows you your different zones. You can set the temperature on each one. If you have in-floor heating, you can set the temperature on that separately. So I feel like the Aqua Hot is much more user-friendly when it comes to the control unit. Now let's talk about the complexity or the difficulty of the install. If you've ever done an Espar or Webasto heater install, it can take typically 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, maybe if you haven't done it before. It's not that technical as long as you follow the instructions. The Aqua Hot or any hydronic system is quite a bit more complex. And I would say the level of difficulty is a lot higher. So like I said, we put an Espar in a van. Typically it takes us 4 hours or so to put this, and it was our first time, but it took, I would say, about a week, solid week. Now we were working on other things too, sometimes waiting on parts, but I would say this is probably more like 30 hours to install it, especially if you're doing in-floor heating. So why is that? So the heater unit is actually very similar. So in this case, you're mounting it underneath the van instead of inside the van. And I really like the way that they mount it. You're actually just mount a plate to somewhere on a vertical, either structure underneath the van. And then there's kind of a hook and a set bolt that goes in and just holds it in place. And then you're doing the same thing as the Espar or Webasto air heater. You're running it from the diesel tank through a pump back to the heater. And then you've got a fresh air intake and an exhaust pipe, which they both have. But then you do have to run your glycol lines using heater hose out of the unit, up through the floor of the vehicle, and then to this guy, to your heat source. And it's basically, and then you also mount a pump, a little small pump underneath next to the heater unit. And that's what pumps the glycol through that unit up into this and back down, and just does a loop. So I would say mounting that unit would be very similar to the complexity of doing the Espar. Takes about the same amount of time, 4 hours or so to mount that heater and run the pipes up through the floor. But then you get into this guy and these, and there is quite a bit involved in connecting these. You can see the wire harness, all the wires. So there's these two connectors. Each of them have, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 wires each. You don't have to use all of them, but you're connecting a lot of wires there. You're connecting these wires here. They've got an AC input here, which I'll talk about in a minute. But then you've got to connect your glycol coming out of the heater. You've got to connect your glycol loop going to your cozies. You've got to run those glycol lines from cozy to cozy, and then you've got to do an electrical connection on those. So that part of it, I would say you're looking at a couple of days to connect all of that. Then you've just basically on the water side, very similar to a water heater. You would just be connecting your hot and cold line the same way that you would into a water heater. So I would say that's very similar to a traditional air heater combined with an electric water heater. It's that glycol loop system that makes it just a little bit trickier. Then once you've got that all finished, then you've got to fill this system with glycol. With the Aqua Hot manual, there's a really good checklist of all the things that you need to do. And while I said it's quite complex and time consuming, if you just follow these items, it's not really that difficult. They say you install the Aqua Hot, mount the expansion bottle, install the diesel burner, install the fresh air intake on the diesel burner. It goes step by step and pretty much in order, and then gives you a page number where to reference that. So it's really not that difficult. It's just a lot of connections, a lot more to do than a typical air heater. So which of these systems is best for you? I think that really depends on your own situation, especially how much hot water you're going to be using. Do you want it? Are you in a cold climate where you're going to want in-floor heat? If you're someplace maybe where it's a warmer climate and you're not going to need heat, it's more like an emergency thing. If you happen to be out someplace cold, you want to be able to turn on a heater for a quick minute, then I would say that the traditional air heater would probably be the way to go. But if you're in a colder climate, especially if you want to have your floor not freezing all the time, then this is a really nice way to go. So the hydronic system is going to be a lot more efficient at heating the inside of the cabin, again, because it's using radiant heat rather than just air heat. Another benefit I mentioned before is it's not going to dry the air out like an air heater will. So with the Aqua Hot, you can also do multiple heating registers. So you can do 2 or 3 different areas. So with the air heater, like a Webasto or an Espar, you're just going to have one place where the air is coming. And if you mount your heater under the seat, like most people do, then it's going to take a lot for that air to get all the way back to your sleeping area, especially if you're in a longer van. And so you'll have it really hot up in the front and a little bit colder in the back, where with the Aqua Hot, because of the multiple registers and because of the radiant heat, you're going to have a much more even type of heat. Now, the Aqua Hot system is also quieter. So if you think about the air heater, it's got a fan that's got to blow that air into the vehicle, right? With this, you've got a couple of small pumps, electric pumps that are pretty quiet, hard to even hear they're running. And then you've got your cozies, which is just an heating element, but then it has fans on the back. And the fans just help push the air through this radiant heat exchanger and out the front. But it's not blowing anywhere near as hard as like an air heater is. It also has a quiet mode where it will slow down those fans so that you can barely hear them. So like once the inside of the cabin is up to the temperature, comfortable temperature, you can turn that down and it's just going to kind of radiate the heat with a little bit of air pushing it, but it's going to be a lot quieter. Now, another benefit of the Aqua Hot is that you're going to have hot water on demand. Now, in an electric water heater, you've got to heat up that water. So it's going to take you anywhere, depending on the size and type of your water heater, maybe 15 minutes up to 30 or 40 minutes to heat your water. And then you're just going to have whatever the capacity is. If you've got a 2.5 gallon heater, that's all you've got. If you've got a 4 gallon heater, that's all you've got. And the bigger the capacity, the longer and it's going to take to heat, the more energy it's going to use. Where with this system, it does take about 20 minutes for the glycol to get heated up sufficiently and running through the system. So it takes you about 20 minutes to get it up there, but then once it's there, you've got continuous hot water for as long as you want it. Now, one limitation is that you can't have a really high flow rate and just let it go. They recommend having 0.8 gallons per minute for like a shower head. And that, to be honest with you, is not very high. Most shower heads for RVs are more like 1.5 gallons per minute or maybe 1.8. So almost double the flow rate of this. So what I found is that if I was running this with a regular shower head that does, just under 2 gallons per minute, I could turn it up full hot and run it, and the water would still be pretty warm, but it's not super hot. In order to keep really hot water coming out, I had to kind of just turn my shower down a little bit so that it wasn't coming out full speed, but just reducing the flow a little bit, and then the water would stay as hot as I wanted it for as long as I wanted it. But a huge benefit of this guy is that you don't need electricity to heat the water, because like I said, the electricity uses a lot. It's using diesel, and if you've run a gasoline or diesel heater, they hardly use any at all. I think most of them use about a gallon in 24 hours if it's running nonstop. And so you're not going to use a lot of fuel, but it's going to heat that glycol and your water and your floor and everything very efficiently. Now, I mentioned that this does have an electrical input. So what this is you can connect 120 volts to this. And at first I thought, oh, well, why would you need that if you can do it so much more efficiently with the diesel or gas? But here's where this guy is a pretty cool feature. They use this special connector called a Molex. I think it's Molex. But basically, you take your 120 volt wire connected to your inverter or your breaker panel, you run it over, you put the connector on that, and then you just plug this in. And so providing 120 volt input, and it needs to be 20 amps, what that does is allow you to run this and run your heater when you're plugged into shore power. It uses a lot. It uses similar to a water heater, so you wouldn't want to use it off of your batteries for very long. Where this is nice is if you're parked like at your house and you just want to plug into shore power and just keep the van from freezing, you can plug in here and just keep the chill off of it. You could even just turn on the in-heat floor and just let that run at maybe 65, 70 degrees, and that's just going to keep the chill off of the inside of the van so your water and pipes don't freeze and so that your batteries don't freeze. So I think that's really a nice feature. Now, as I said, this system takes about 20 minutes to heat up. And so once the glycol's hot, then it's got to go through all these things and heat up these exchangers and your floor, and then that's got to radiate the heat into the vehicle. So it's going to take quite a bit longer to warm the vehicle up. But then it's going to do a much better job at maintaining that heat. An air heater, on the other hand, will heat the vehicle up pretty fast, 10 minutes or so, and it's going to have that vehicle toasty warm inside. Now, another benefit with going with an air heater and a water heater is you're adding a little bit of capacity to your fresh water. Because if you have, say, a 30-gallon fresh water tank and then a 4-gallon hot water tank, you've got effectively 34 gallons of fresh water. With this, you don't have a hot water tank, and so you only have what is in your fresh water tank. So not a big deal for most people, but it is a consideration. Now, as far as costs go, this system is about $5,000 to $6,000, not including the in-floor heat. So you've got quite a bit of cost there compared to an air heater, which for an Espar or a Webasto, you're looking at probably $1,200 to $1,500. Now, if you want to go with the in-floor heating, that can add quite a bit of cost. It is a little bit more difficult of a DIY job because you've got to put the pipe in the flooring. So there are kits out there. Aqua Hot actually sells a kit that you put the floor down, you put the tubing into the floor, you lay another floor on top of that, insulate it, things like that. But those are quite expensive. You're going to probably spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 just for the in-floor kit to be able to run the tubing through. And then there are a couple of different components that you need to get to connect this. There's a separate mixing valve and a separate pump for the in-floor heating. So you are going to spend some extra money, and I think it's probably around $1,000 for the extra components. So if you're doing this system by yourself, you're probably looking at about $5,000 to $6,000 for the system, and then you're looking at another $5,000 or $6,000 for the floor. So $10,000 to $12,000, that's a pretty big number. And it might just be too much for some people, and that's totally understandable. But if you really want the comfort, I would say this is the way to go. You could also quite possibly be able to save money on your batteries because you're not going to need as much. Like I said, the number one consumer of electricity typically is a water heater. And so if you don't have a water heater, you may be able to get away with 400 amp hours of batteries, where maybe with a water heater, you were going to need 600. And so because of that, you might be able to save a couple $1,000s there, which kind of brings the cost of just the Aqua Hot system a little bit closer to the Espar or Webasto air heater system. Now, if you compare that to the cost of an Espar along with a water heater, you're looking, like I said, around $1,200 to $1,500 for the Espar or Webasto, but then you've also got to get a water heater. Depending on which type you go with, that could be anywhere from a couple hundred to maybe $800, maybe up to $1,000 for that water heater. So you're all into that under $2,500. So you're about half the cost of this system and about a quarter the cost of this system with in-floor heat. So who are each of these systems best for? I would say that if you're a DIYer and you're pretty cost conscious and maybe don't want to tackle a pretty difficult install, then the Espar along with a traditional electric water heater is probably the best way to go. If you were willing to spend the money, you want the very best, you want it to be really comfortable, especially if you're in a cold climate, then I would highly recommend you look at a hydronic system because it's just so much more efficient. So I'd love to hear what you think. Would you like to have a hydronic system with the in-floor heating in your camper van conversion? Or would you rather just go with the traditional air heater combined with an electric water heater? Let us know down below. Now, I've been talking in front of this van right here, which we're in the final stages. We got about a week and a half left to go on this van. Interestingly enough, this is a second van for our customer. So this van is basically the same layout as the one that our customers bought from us 2.5 years ago, but with some new improved features that you're definitely going to want to see. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so that you're notified when that video is released. And we'll see you in the next video. Jeff with Thrive Vans. Thrive on. See ya.